She had buried her past deep in the swamp, her grief, her guilt, her voice. For years, Martha lived in silence among the shadows of the trees, but when a terrified baby elephant screamed for help, something ancient stirred within her. She wasn't a ranger, she wasn't a warrior, but that day, she became the one the forest needed. Cypress Hollow had a quiet that was older than memory, a silence shaped by wind through cypress knees, by gators sliding beneath green water, and by the ghosts of things once wild and now forgotten. Morning crept in like an afterthought, reluctant and heavy, dragging its pale light through dense mist that curled low over the swamp. Trees rose like sleeping giants, their gnarled roots lost in black waters, their canopies swallowing the sky. The stillness broke, a faint splash, then another. Tiny ripples spread across a pool half shrouded in fog. Something moved, small, clumsy, not meant to be alone. The creature's wide ears flapped as it stumbled through the reeds, mud clinging to its tiny legs. Barely more than a baby, the elephant calf blinked its large gray eyes in confusion. His name, though none had yet spoken it aloud, was Willow. Willow was no taller than the height of a man's chest, his skin still soft and a shade lighter than the older elephant's. His trunk swung uselessly, unsure of what to grab. He had been separated from his herd sometime before dawn, swept down a narrow current that branched off the main river. He hadn't meant to wander. He had simply followed the scent of something sweet, something that reminded him of his mother, and now she was gone. The swamp was cold for an elephant calf. Every distant frog croak or distant bird call made Willow flinch. He let out a low, trembling trumpet, more a question than a cry, and the swamp, as always, gave no answer. Except this time, something else stirred. From the far side of the muddy clearing, near the edge of a rotting log, eyes gleamed in the underbrush. 4 pairs, golden and cold. The tigers had arrived. Rogue was the largest of them, a male in his prime, broad-shouldered, muscles shifting like liquid fire under his striped coat. His eyes were fierce and calculating, his face scarred from battles over territory. Rogue led this small band, 2 females and another younger male, all lean and hungry. Rogue was not cruel, not in the way humans imagined predators could be, but he was methodical, efficient. Willow was a mistake of nature's rhythm, a misstep that now offered them a rare prize in a land not often generous. They crouched low, barely making a sound. The fog cloaked their advance, but Willow sensed something. He froze, ears twitching, trunk raised. Another trumpet, this time louder, sharper, laced with fear. From behind a screen of tall swamp grass, someone else had heard it too. Martha Ellison stood on the edge of her wooden porch, the boards creaking faintly beneath her feet. Her small cabin was built on stilts, tucked at the edge of the clearing, half swallowed by willow trees and creeping moss. The swamp had been her home for 20 years, ever since she walked away from the world. Martha was 68 years old, a woman shaped by intellect and sorrow. Her frame was wiry and strong despite her age, the kind of strength that comes from hauling supplies through mud and storms. Her silver hair was pinned up loosely, and her sharp green eyes missed nothing. Once, those eyes had sparkled in university lecture halls. She had been a brilliant ethologist, specializing in elephant behavior. Her research had taken her across continents, but that was before the fire, before she buried her only son and her work beside him. Since then, she had lived like a ghost. The swamp didn't ask questions, it simply took her in. But the sound that shattered the fog this morning, the pleading, panicked call of a creature too young to know death, pierced something deep within her. She grabbed her binoculars from the hook beside the door and scanned the tree line. Her breath caught. A baby elephant, alone, shaking, and just beyond him, movement, feline shapes, a flash of orange, the unmistakable low-slung grace of tigers, Martha didn't hesitate. She ducked inside, grabbed the flare gun from the shelf, and loaded a cartridge. She knew a flare wouldn't stop a tiger, but it might delay them, might give the calf time. Stepping carefully across the porch, she raised the flare gun toward the open sky and fired. A hiss, a spark, then a burst of red light arched upward and disappeared into the mist. The sound startled the tigers. Rogue paused, growled low, ears flattening. He hadn't expected interference from this side of the swamp. Still crouching, he signaled the others to hold. His eyes scanned the cabin. A shape moved. Human. Martha knew she couldn't fight predators, but she could be loud. She rang the old bell tied to a metal frame above her porch, its clang echoing across the clearing. She switched on her high-beam spotlight, a leftover from hurricane seasons, and swept it toward the reeds. Willow blinked at the sudden light, unsure, but instinct told him to move toward it. He stumbled forward just as the tigers began to fan out again. Martha reached for her radio. It was old, the kind used by park rangers decades ago, but she kept it charged. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked to Channel 4. "Dylan," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It's me, Martha. There's a calf, elephant calf, in the clearing. Tigers, too. I need help." There was silence for a long beat, then a crackle. "Martha, what the hell are you—" "No time. Cypress Hollow, the floodplain near the North Bend, please." The voice on the other end, male, mid-30s, tense, belonged to Dylan Ellison, her nephew, a forest ranger stationed at Belle Terre Wildlife Management Area, 20 miles west. They hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. "Copy that," he said finally. "On my way." Martha lowered the radio. Her hands steadied, her breath fogged the air in front of her. Somewhere below, the baby elephant let out a long, weary trumpet.
The flare's glow had long since faded, swallowed by the suffocating canopy of cypress and fog. But the tension it left behind coiled tighter around the swamp like a noose. Willow stood in the half-light, his breath shallow, heart thudding so loudly in his chest it seemed to echo against the moss-covered trunks. His legs, trembling beneath him, were splattered with muck and slime. His wide eyes locked on the rippling shadows that circled just beyond the reach of Martha's spotlight. Rogue remained still, his striped coat melting into the brush, as if carved from the swamp itself. The other tigers fanned out with feline precision. There was Cinder, the sleek and silent female, smaller but faster than the others, with a torn left ear and yellow eyes that seemed to absorb moonlight. Ash, the youngest of the three, lanky and unpredictable, paced impatiently between tree roots, his inexperience betrayed by his twitching tail. The third, Raya, older than the others and scarred from an encounter with alligators in her youth, stayed back, watching not the calf, but the cabin. Rogue gave a low, almost inaudible grunt. "Advance." Willow flinched. His trunk swung up like a lifeline toward the air, scenting danger all around. And then, just as the closest predator broke cover, he turned and bolted. The calf's flight was ungainly, desperate. Mud sucked at his feet, reeds snapped under his weight, and brambles tore across his skin. The tigers gave chase, paused silent on the wet earth, yellow eyes locked forward. Willow crashed through the thickets, veering instinctively toward the only light he could see, the faint golden beam still flickering from Martha's cabin. Inside, Martha had not sat down since the flare. She was pacing with the slow determination of someone used to waiting out storms. Her porch light flickered slightly, shadows dancing across the walls. With her hand pressed to her chest, she stared toward the tree lean where the calf had last been seen. Suddenly, a new sound broke the stillness. The distant, familiar purr of an engine. Martha exhaled sharply. Farther down the winding dirt track that threaded through the swamp, a forest green Jeep Wrangler tore through puddles, tires throwing up arcs of muddy water. Behind the wheel was Dylan Ellison, late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his brown ranger uniform splattered with dried sweat and dust from the day's patrol. His face was sharp-jawed and sun-touched, with storm-gray eyes that once shimmered with humor and now narrowed with worry. A faint scar crossed his right cheek, a souvenir from the wildfire that had claimed his cousin and reshaped his bond with Martha forever. Dylan gripped the steering wheel tighter as the beams of his headlights swept across tree trunks like searching hands. He didn't know what he expected to find, just that his aunt's voice had cracked for the first time in years, and that was enough. Beside him, a low whine came from the passenger seat. Remy, a 6-year-old bloodhound with drooping jowls and ears longer than Dylan's forearms, lifted his head. His coat, once a bright russet, had dulled with age and experience. But his nose, still as sharp as ever. Remy sniffed, then gave a bark, sharp and alert. "Smell it too, boy," Dylan muttered, pushing harder on the pedal. Back at the clearing, Willow was failing. His legs gave out near the base of Cypress tree, his side heaving. Rogue slowed, calculating, his eyes cold. Ash and Cinder flanked him, forming a silent semicircle. The calf tried to stand, then slipped again. But just as Rogue stepped forward, something shattered the stillness. A klaxon, shrill, human-made, echoing through the canopy like the howl of something mechanical and ancient. The tigers froze. From the ridge behind Martha's cabin, the Jeep roared into view. Dylan stepped out, rifle slung over one shoulder, his eyes sweeping the clearing. He said nothing at first, simply surveyed the scene. The baby elephant, mud-covered and breathless. The tigers, frozen mid-stalk. Martha met him halfway across the porch. Her hair was damp with fog, her eyes both fierce and ashamed. "I told you not to come," she said quietly. "You said there were tigers," he replied, not unkindly. "And an elephant." He stepped forward, Remy following, tail high, nose to the ground. As they advanced, the tigers hissed, but did not lunge. Rogue, recognizing the weapon and the dog, gave a throaty growl and slowly began backing away into the shadows. The others followed, eyes glowing like fireflies in retreat. Dylan knelt beside Willow, whose legs were still trembling. He didn't touch him, just murmured softly, "Easy now, little one. You're not alone anymore." The calf blinked, then let out a weak trumpet. Dylan turned toward his aunt. "We can't leave him here," he said. "I know," Martha replied. "Then we need a transport. A boat, maybe. There's still the old supply barge docked at Miller's Curve. If it still floats." Dylan nodded, but as he stood, he noticed something strange on the ground. A set of boot prints. Not his, not Martha's, too large to be hers, and too fresh to be old. And not just prints, but a half-buried wire, glinting in the light. A snare. He knelt and gently pulled at it, revealing a tightly coiled trap meant for larger prey. "Someone set this up recently," he said, voice low, close to where Willow was found. Martha's jaw tightened. "Poachers, or land surveyors who don't want elephants wrecking their maps." The shadows deepened around them as night fully settled in. The swamp held its breath once more. The immediate danger had passed, but something darker lurked behind it. The swamp had stilled, as if the ancient breath of Cypress Hollow had caught in its throat. Night held the land in quiet suspense. Moonlight filtered only in threads through the dense latticework of trees. The air hung damp and unmoving, saturated with the scent of mud, wild orchids, and something sharper, adrenaline and fear. Willow stood with his small, mud-caked back pressed to a fallen cypress trunk. His flanks rose and fell in frantic rhythm, legs trembling under his weight. His wide, terrified eyes scanned the half-shadows ahead. 3 sets of eyes, amber and low to the ground, stared back at him. Rogue and 2 others, now closing in like storm clouds, silent and certain. Their paws made no sound, but the low growls that vibrated in their throats rumbled across the water, a cruel lullaby beneath the surface calm. The leader, Rogue, moved first, his shoulders rolling with terrifying ease, muscles coiled beneath his sleek, striped hide. His breath steamed in the night. He did not pounce. He measured, calculated. The calf was cornered, the terrain soft, nowhere to run. A few yards to his left, Ash crept in, his youth emboldening his steps, eager, head lowered. To the right, Cinder mirrored the movement, her belly nearly brushing the ground. The ambush was ancient, executed 1,000 times across continents, but rarely against prey this sacred. Willow let out a long, helpless trumpet, not a scream, a summoning. The sound ricocheted off the trees like a plea made of bone and memory. Birds scattered. The mist itself seemed to flinch. And then everything stopped. The water stilled. The tigers paused mid-step. Rogue's ears twitched, sensing something shift, not in the brush, but in the silence itself. A silence that felt, watched. A moment later, Dylan burst through the thicket on the ridge above, his boots skidding against wet soil. Rifle lowered, flashlight raised, he swept the clearing in a fast arc. He saw the shapes, the tiger's poised bodies, the trembling calf. And then he heard again, the trumpet. But this time, deeper, not Willow's. Dylan froze. It came again, long, resonant from deeper in the forest, farther than the eye could reach. Another. Then two more. They weren't echoes. They were answers. Something was coming. The tigers heard it too. Rogue snarled low, unsure for the first time. Ash stepped back, tail twitching. Cinder's ears flicked, the rhythm of the hunt disrupted. Dylan took a step forward, slowly. Easy now, he muttered. Not to Willow, not even to the tigers, but to the night itself. Behind him, Martha emerged from the trees, holding a flare in one hand and a worn leather satchel in the other. Her boots sank into the swamp's edge, her eyes locked not on the animals, but on her nephew. "Do you hear them?" she asked. "I do," Dylan replied. "They're close." At that moment, the forest erupted. A cacophony of low rumbles and heavy footfalls rolled through the trees like thunder wrapped in flesh. Branches broke, water splashed, and from between two twisted trunks stepped a massive female elephant, her skin a tapestry of scars and age. Her tusk on the left was broken, jagged halfway down, a wound from some old battle. Her name, unknown to Dylan or Martha, was Magnus. Two other elephants followed, one larger than Willow, likely a sibling, and another younger female with a protective posture. Together, they stepped into the clearing as one. Magnus raised her trunk and let out a deep bellow that shook loose moss from the trees. The effect was immediate. The tigers halted completely. Ash whimpered. Cinder backed up, slow but deliberate. Rogue stood his ground, eyes narrowing, but only for a heartbeat. Then, with a reluctant hiss, he turned. The others followed, melting back into the shadows, their hunger outweighed by caution. The clearing belonged to giants now. Willow gave a confused chirp. Magnus moved slowly toward him, her massive feet causing ripples to dance across the water. She touched her trunk gently to his back, then his head, her presence both protective and commanding. Willow leaned into her. Martha's breath caught. Dylan lowered his weapon, stepping carefully toward the group. "Are we witnessing what I think we are?" he asked. "Reunion," Martha murmured. "Family." Remy, still by Dylan's side, allowed a soft huff and lay down, tail thumping. Behind them, another figure approached, a new presence. She was tall, willowy, with sunburned skin and messy auburn curls pulled back under a Green Ranger cap. Her uniform bore the emblem of the Wildlife Emergency Response Unit. Renee Salazar, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and unsentimental, had been sent as backup after Dylan's early radio distress. Renee had a reputation, cool-headed in crisis, efficient in the field, but distant with people. She had lost a fiancé during a failed animal extraction years ago, and though her face smiled politely, her eyes never did. She walked with a confident stride, assessing the scene with trained calm. "Quite a mess," she muttered, hands on hips. "Did you invite the entire forest?" "Not intentionally," Dylan replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I'm starting to think the forest invited itself." Renee crouched near the snare Dylan had found earlier. "You were right," she said, lifting a piece of nylon rope threaded with blood. "This wasn't old. Someone's laying traps." "Poachers?" Dylan asked. "Or land developers who want to clear this zone without clearing their conscience." She stood. Either way, the timing's too perfect. This calf wasn't just unlucky. Martha stepped forward, her voice steady. If they wanted the herd scattered, attacking a calf would do it. Renee nodded slowly. And now they know the herd is nearby. Dylan looked at Magnus, still watching the humans with weary, ancient eyes. We can't let them stay exposed like this. No, Martha said. But they came back for him. They'll stay now. Then we protect them here, Dylan said. Whatever it takes. The moon had risen high above the trees now, casting silver light on the scene. On elephants reunited, humans uneasy, and a swamp that had come alive with the thunder of loyalty. The swamp no longer whispered, it breathed. Trees stood tall, like old sentinels watching over an ancient rite, and the fog that had once concealed threats now curled in reverence. The moon hovered full and luminous above Cypress Hollow, bathing the clearing in a pale silver that shimmered across the water's skin and reflected in the eyes of those present, human and beast alike. Magnus stood at the center of it all, her towering frame etched against the night. Her broken left tusk gleamed like a battle-worn crown. The heavy folds of her gray skin carried the dust of time and the story of survival. She was not just Willow's mother. She was a matriarch. Her presence made the earth hum with memory. Her two companions flanked her protectively. One, larger and still in the flush of youth, had the same high forehead and sharp gaze as Magnus, likely an older sibling to Willow. The other, a younger cow, moved with hesitant steps, but kept herself close to the calf, emitting low rumbles of reassurance. Willow nestled between their legs, visibly trembling but clinging to the scent of home. His small trunk lifted hesitantly toward Magnus' chest. She lowered her massive head, brushing his face with the underside of her trunk, and for the first time that night he stopped shaking. Dylan stood several yards away, his boots soaked, his shirt streaked with sweat and swamp water. But he made no move. His rifle lay forgotten at his feet. His breath slowed. He hadn't realized he was crying until Remy, his old bloodhound, nudged his thigh gently. Beside Dylan, Martha remained motionless. Her expression had softened, the sharp lines of weariness around her mouth giving way to something both odd and fragile. The light from the porch still cast her silhouette in golden outline, but the years that weighed on her seemed, for a moment, lifted. She didn't look at the elephants. She looked at her nephew. There was a quiet between them, the kind that could only exist between people who had once loved fiercely, broken painfully, and now stood at the ledge of something uncertain. Still don't like to stay on the radio, huh? Dylan said softly, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. I prefer signals that don't lie, Martha replied. Light, sound, footprints, and elephants. Martha's eyes glistened, especially elephants. Behind them, a soft hum of engine drew closer. A battered forest patrol truck rolled up the trail slowly, headlights dimmed. Out stepped a tall, lean man in his mid-50s with graying temples and a thick mustache. His uniform bore the insignia of the Louisiana State Conservation Bureau. Ranger Tom Alvarez was known throughout 3 parishes, not for warmth, but for unflinching fairness. His face was weather-worn, his voice gravel and molasses. He had once been Martha's field partner before the fire. He surveyed the scene silently, one hand resting on his belt. Then his gaze settled on Magnus. I'll be damned, he muttered. I thought she was legend. She is, Martha said, and she just walked out of the trees. Tom turned to Dylan. I got your message. You sure it's not a trap? That herd's been missing for over a year. We found snares. Someone wanted them scattered. But Magnus came back anyway. Tom spat to the side, thoughtful. That's a big gamble. But she came for her calf. Smart girl. Meanwhile, Renee Salazar was crouched again near the snare Dylan had uncovered earlier. Her gloved fingers brushed the twisted wire, inspecting the knot. Her eyes narrowed. She stood and beckoned Dylan over. This isn't random, she said. This is set with precision. Whoever did this knew where the herd would move, where water lines forced their path. You saying we've got professionals? I'm saying we've got someone who knows elephants. Someone who studies their patterns, just like Martha used to. She glanced toward the cabin. Maybe even someone who wanted her out of the way. Dylan tensed. You think this is connected to her past? Or yours? A branch cracked in the distance. The group turned quickly, but it was only the younger elephant shifting near the edge of the clearing. The moment had passed, but the suspicion lingered. Inside the cabin, Martha finally stepped away from the porch and approached the herd slowly. Her movements were slow and respectful, and though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, her face remained calm. Magnus watched her, unblinking. Then, with a deep breath, Martha whispered, "I'm sorry." No one responded, but the trees seemed to lean closer. She wasn't apologizing to the elephant. She turned to Dylan, voice steadier. "I kept blaming the world after what happened. I thought maybe hiding would keep everything from breaking again." "It didn't," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you came anyway." "I always would have," he said. They stood in silence. Behind them, Remy laid his head on his paws and dozed, his work for now complete. Morning unfurled slowly over Cypress Hollow, filtering through the moss-draped canopy in golden ribbons. The air, once thick with night and tension, now hung quieter, infused with the scent of dew, wild jasmine, and something ancient, the warm, earthy musk of elephants. Magnus stood still in the soft glow, her massive frame casting a long shadow over the clearing. Her ears flared slightly, listening, sensing. Every breath she drew felt deliberate, grounded in a memory older than the swamp itself. Willow lingered beneath her, shielded by her bulk and his older sibling, a teenage bull with curious eyes and a playful streak, occasionally nudged his younger brother with his trunk, testing his balance. The youngest female of the herd paced near the tree line, alert but calm, her large eyes flicking toward any sudden movement. Martha stood barefoot on the cabin steps, a battered field notebook clutched in her hand. Her boots had been left behind, forgotten. The weight of years lifted subtly from her shoulders as she watched Magnus position herself between the humans and the forest beyond. The gesture wasn't random. It was protection, not just for the calf, but for her. The unspoken truth sank in. Magnus remembered her. Dylan, still in his mud-splattered ranger uniform, knelt near the snare they had discovered the night before. He carefully laid out measuring tape, documented the trap's angle, and took photographs. Nearby, Remy sniffed around the base of a tree, tail flicking. The bloodhound's floppy ears trailed through the brush, his nose low and intent. He let out a soft whine near a disturbed patch of dirt, drawing Dylan's attention. Underneath a thin layer of moss, Dylan found something new, a cigarette butt. Crushed. Fresh. He bagged it, frowning. From the far side of the clearing, Renee Salazar approached with her usual quiet steps. Her ponytail was tucked under her ranger cap, and she wore a utility vest stocked with field tools. Her sharp gaze took in the scene without emotion, but when she spoke, it was with a measured calm. "Those prints lead north," she said. "Past the basin. North goes toward private land," Dylan replied. "Bayou Wind Holdings owns a huge stretch beyond a reserve boundary." "Doesn't surprise me," Renee muttered. "They've been applying for development permits for months. This part of the hollow is still protected, but if they can clear the animals, they clear the paperwork too," Dylan finished bitterly. Martha turned, hearing them. Her voice was quieter, but no less firm. "They don't just want the land. They want the memory of it erased." Silence fell. The elephant stirred slightly, Magnus' trunk gently curling around a branch to strip off bark. Then a crack of tires against gravel echoed from the old ranger road. A rust-colored pickup truck pulled up, its grill caked with dried mud. The door opened, and out stepped a tall woman in her early 40s with short-cropped silver blonde hair and dark sunglasses. Her blazer was sharp, out of place in the wild, and her heels, impractical and clean, tapped against the roots as she walked. Clara Vance, regional liaison for Bayou Wind Holdings, was known for her immaculate appearance and even colder tone. Her face, though striking, had a calculated stillness to it, like a porcelain mask worn too long. She had once been a rising conservationist herself, until corporate lobbying paid better. She scanned the group, lingering a little too long on the elephants, then smiled tightly. "Well," she said, "this is unexpected." "You're on state land," Renee said flatly. Am I? Clara replied, pretending to check her GPS tablet. Boundary lines shift. Dylan stepped forward. You're the one setting traps out here. I don't set traps, Mr. Ellison. I sign contracts. If some land manager got overzealous, I'm sure we'll sort it out. Besides, you can't prove anything. Martha stepped down from the porch, the notebook still in her hand. Cypress Hollow is protected. So are the species within it. Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. That protection is being challenged in court. And let's be honest, elephants aren't native here. This is unusual activity, not protected wildlife. Magnus took a step forward, her massive foot sinking into soft earth with a forceful thud. Clara flinched just slightly. Renee's voice was like flint. They're here now. That's all that matters. Dylan exchanged a look with Martha. Then he turned back to Clara. We're reactivating the old research station. The Hollow's becoming a semi-wild elephant reserve. Temporary fencing, satellite tracking, ranger oversight. A sanctuary. That's not your decision to make, Clara said, her voice tightening. It's not just ours, Martha replied. It's theirs. She nodded toward Magnus, who now stood with ears spread wide, trunk lifted slightly. Not in aggression, but as a gesture of presence. Clara's jaw tensed. You'll be hearing from our legal team. Good, Dylan said. We'll have the environmental lawyers ready. Clara turned, made a sharp motion to her driver, and stalked back to the truck. The engine started, and soon they disappeared down the path, leaving only the smell of exhaust behind. The clearing fell quiet again. Later that afternoon, Dylan and Martha walked the old trail that led to the research outpost. It had been dormant for years, overtaken by vines, roof sagging, door hanging askew. But inside, the bones remained, tables, logbooks, cages, tracking collars. Martha touched the peeling wall, remembering the last time she stood there, the fire, the screams, the loss. Her son had helped build this place. His initials were still carved into a beam near the rear window. I never thought I'd open this again, she whispered. You're not doing it alone, Dylan said, and she believed him. The morning sun rose gently over Cypress Hollow, casting warm, honeyed light across the treetops, as if the forest itself had been reborn. Birds chirped lazily between the branches, and the swamp's surface mirrored the sky with unbothered calm. A soft mist still lingered over the marshes, curling like memory around the cypress knees and old footbridges. The world had changed, and somehow stayed the same. It had been a full year since the night Willow cried out and the forest answered. Now, he was no longer the trembling calf who had once stood cornered and alone. Willow had grown tall, his shoulders stronger, his eyes calmer. His gait held a loping confidence, and the small herd followed him with ease. Magnus still walked ahead, but now allowed him room to lead. He still bore a faint scar on his flank from that harrowing night, but it was a mark of belonging, not weakness. Each morning, the herd passed by the old cabin, as if by ritual. Sometimes they drank from the low basin Dylan had filled with fresh water, or played in the mud wallow behind the tool shed. Sometimes they simply stood, listening. Inside the restored research station, Martha sat at her desk, now cleared of cobwebs and stacked with freshly bound field logs, radio equipment, and maps marked with tiny blue flags. She wore her old ranger's vest again, the one she had buried after the fire, and the pendant of her son's initials hung from her neck, faintly shining in the morning light. Her silver hair was longer now, tied into a low braid, and though the years were still written in the fine lines around her eyes, those eyes no longer looked hollow. She was alive in the way only people are when they have been cracked open and chosen to grow from the wound. Across the desk sat Heather Moss, a bright-eyed conservation intern in her early 20s. Heather was petite, with curly red-gold hair that bounced when she moved, and hands always smudged with soil or graphite. She had a journal filled with messy, excited sketches of the herd, and a voice that always rose slightly when she spoke about wildlife, as if hope lived just behind her teeth. I logged 3 more sightings of Willow near the northern glade this week, Heather said, flipping open a chart. And he's definitely been practicing tree pushes. He nearly knocked over the old water tank. Martha chuckled. He'll be trouble when he's full grown. Good trouble, Heather replied. The kind that scares off bulldozers. Out by the old boathouse, Dylan was repairing the dock with a hammer slung over one shoulder. His arms had grown stronger, not from gym work, but from labor under sun and rain. His beard was fuller now, sun-bleached at the edges. His expression had softened too, though he still bore the watchfulness of a man who had faced loss and chosen not to let it define him. Remy, now nearly 7, dozed beside the toolbox, his ears flicking occasionally at dragonflies. He no longer chased the herd. Instead, he watched them with quiet wisdom, as if understanding had settled into his bones with age. Behind the tool shed, wooden signs now marked paths: Observation Ridge, Magnus Trail, Willow Crossing. Tourists didn't come here. Not yet. The sanctuary was still being quietly grown, nurtured, protected like an ember waiting to become flame. The government had officially designated Cypress Hollow as the first semi-wild elephant refuge in the southern United States 6 months earlier. A modest announcement, a press conference nobody covered. But it was enough. Enough to keep the developers away. Enough to secure funding. Enough to matter. One figure who had not returned was Rogue. Since the night the forest rose, the tiger and his band had not been seen again. Some said they had migrated deeper into the wetlands. Others believed they had sensed the shift, that the balance of power had changed, that this place, now claimed by giants, was no longer theirs. At the heart of it all, Martha and Dylan ran the station like two old gears finally clicking into place. There were disagreements about data, fencing, outreach, but the kind born of shared passion, not division. They moved in rhythm now. One evening, near twilight, the pair sat on the porch watching the herd graze beneath the tall silhouettes of cypress trees. The swamp glowed orange and gold, and a breeze rustled the leaves gently. "You ever think it'd look like this?" Dylan asked. "No," Martha said, "but I always hoped." He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a bronze plaque engraved with a name, the Ellison Hollow Wildlife Observatory. She stared at it a long time. "They'll remember this," he said. "It's not about being remembered," she whispered, voice soft with emotion. "It's about remembering who we are." That night, as the wind swept through the trees and owls stirred under the canopy, Willow let out a low trumpet, not one of fear or warning, but of recognition. And somewhere, far in the depths of the hollow, the forest answered. Sometimes, the ones who seem lost are simply waiting for someone to stand beside them. And sometimes it's not strength or power that saves us, but love, memory, and the quiet courage to return. This story reminds us that healing can come from unexpected places, a second chance, a long-lost bond, a forest that rises not in anger, but in protection. Whether it's an elephant calf finding its way home, or a family rediscovering one another, the message is the same. We are never truly alone when we choose to care. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment below, even just one word, "Amen," to show you're walking this path with us. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and stay with us. May your days be filled with kindness, courage, and quiet miracles. God bless you, truly.